Well, thank you everybody for joining us in Salem and online today for the Rural Structural Fire Protection Review Task Force meeting for March 27th, 2024. So appreciate everybody being here. And it should be a great meeting. We're going to clean up some items that we've been working on for a couple months. And we'll do our last review of statute, last section of statute today. So appreciate everybody going through the survey and filling out that information and tool prior to today's meeting. That really helps. We'll work through today. Then we'll take lunch around noon. We may actually get through a lot of the statute review prior to lunch today. We'll just see how it goes. But we'll take a lunch break and then we'll wrap up for the afternoon. I would expect we get out of here a little earlier than scheduled, likely today, which is always a good thing. So first up on the agenda, I guess, would be approval of the minutes of the February 23rd meeting. Everybody received those, have a chance to review them. If so, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Perfect. Thank you very much. Next up will be follow up on ORS chapter 478-260 through 665. And I think that's tab 3 in your binder, or we're going to have it online. Is that right? Or up on the screen?
Yes, it's tab 3 of your binder.
All right. Work our way through that. Let's go to the next section there, the 478-260 Fire Chief Headquarters. There we go. This was the fire evacuation routes, emergency medical services. The feedback that we received on this. Let's see, reading through it here. Well, this was the assistants, the fire chief hiring assistants, right? And I think the understanding there was that the fire chief hires the assistant, not the board. Was a question. Remember the feedback from Christy on that.
Like Christy has her hand raised. Go ahead.
Okay, Christy.
Can other folks hear us online?
Yep, we can hear you.
Looks like she said her mic is turned
Okay.
off. There we go.
My mic wasn't turned on and I couldn't turn it on. Thank you. That's a neat trick to turn off the attorney's mic. I got to remember that. I just wanted to clarify, because the bullet point isn't exactly in here, is that regarding the assistant, it is a policy choice for the committee to decide if you want to allow the board to hire an assistant. The recommendation, I believe, from both Genoa and from me is that practically that would cause some really difficult power dynamics between the board and chief. And so I don't necessarily see in here the recommendation to strike that phrase. I see the or otherwise, which doesn't pertain to the assistant issue. And I see the second bullet and the third bullet would to replace assistant with subject matter expert, but I don't see an option to just strike that piece that says that the board can hire an assistant. That's all. I don't have a dog in that fight. That's for you policymakers.
Thank you, Christie. I think Christie addressed it. I think the recommendation from the subgroup is that maybe that language be clarified, that any assistants that are hired report to the fire chief and not to the board. Is that correct?
Correct.
So that section of statute, we would recommend as a committee be modified or clarified that that's what the intent is.
Right, and there's the other 2.280 that references that as well, right? So it would be copied in both of them.
Okay,
So just so we've got it clear in the notes, the group is recommending that we add clarity around reporting to the fire chief and that it's mirrored in 280 also, whatever that language is that is developed for 260. Is that what I heard?
Yes.
Okay.
is anybody opposed to that? Everybody's good with that? Okay. All right, the next section, 478.
Page 2 of this. We did our subgroup, we wanted to strike the word and assistance. Is that something we're wanting to stick with this recommendation?
I think it's still a good recommendation to strike assistance at 260.
Okay. Okay, so
No, perfect. The next section, 478, 260 sub 4. That is the EMS section. And emergency service. We talked about emergency service is sort of the key word in there. And we should look at the EMS modernization committee work associated with that. I think the consensus of the subcommittee was there's work in this space being done with the EMS modernization committee. And we should recommend that they address this issue. I think it was the EMS portion of that. I don't believe we were making a recommendation to change statute in this section.
I recall it just making sure it's open for future.
Yep,
Correct.
I had no
So-
recommendation.
Yeah.
I am trying to pull up the statute now. I don't have, my internet is in and out, but can somebody tell me what 260 sub 4 was? Ah. Okay, so my notes indicate that you were going to take the issue to the EMS Modernization Committee to discuss whether non-transport ambulance services are authorized by the statute.
Correct.
Okay.
But for this group, no change to the statute.
So moving forward is written, is our recommendation?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So the next one is 478, 270. Is that right, Amanda?
Yes.
There was discussion around section 1. Wordsmith around shall report monthly. Check with how rules align with statute. Also look at the legislative intent. Is reporting quarterly an option? And then there's discussion about what are the reports, whether it's NFIRS, So just questions about reporting frequency. And then Christie provided feedback. It's sort of more of a policy situation. Full committee should discuss further. No legal concerns with that. I think it's probably an agency question about reporting frequency, the method. If we had anything else on that, Travis, from your thought.
So there's I think a discussion, I think we want to dive a little bit deeper. There was a discussion around, is it the department or is it the board that reports monthly to the state fire marshal? And then what's the frequency and what is it, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I think this is like almost like a information required. It doesn't specify the forms, right? And is there new technology or a different way to do things and how it's reported? And so I think there was a little more work in 270 that we wanted to do. And if this group is comfortable, us doing that work as an agency and then bring back a recommendation to either modernize it or, leave it as is. I do think we want to be clear about whether it's the department versus the board, because departments report to us quite a bit. I don't know how boards report to us. And so just being clear around what it is and what the expectations are.
I'm not a big fan of, I like black and white.
Yep.
But this is one of the few times that the gray area for me, something as simple as the district shall report to the state fire marshal as required or as directed by the state fire marshal. It's just that simple. Because that way, as times change, whether it's electronic or paper reporting or different requirements with NEPRS or hazmat, then the state fire marshal can go ahead and update that or have the freedom to update it to all the districts. And it would be within the district to go from the board or the fire chief.
I like that. Being a little more vague and allowing a little more flexibility as directed by the state fire marshal. So I got a note here. Thanks, chief. And we'll come back with some additional thoughts on what it looks like.
Yeah. Any other comments on that section? Okay, let's go to 478-310. Response to fire public safety incident outside its own territory by the district or municipality. Subcommittee feedback, section 1, defined as to who pays for services provided versus you shall be paid. Just clarifying who's going to pay for those services. If a district is asking for help, then they're inadequately protected, could be for just that moment or in general. There was discussion about that. Payment provision should probably be drafted to be broader versus passive. And section 2 should be updated to more than just planes and trains. Discuss with full task force how many districts use this. Could the MOB plan be referenced here? So let's take maybe section 1 first. Needs to define who pays for services provided. Any comments or thoughts about that?
So I will say that the sections that we reviewed for this session today, 702 through 990.
Right.
I think some of those kind of address this a little bit later, but some of them addressed on billing up to, I think one of them said up to 3 times the allotted amount. And it empowers us to bill. I guess where I'm going with this is that something that we should take a look at to see where we're at today with what we're reviewing, or is this something that needs to be married with the current statutes we're looking at today? I don't think I said that very eloquently.
I think I get where you're going. It could be both, right? I think the section you're referring to is in the annexation language, and that's within the service, the identified service territory for annexation. So that's the 5 to 7 mile area where you can bill 3 times the amount. This is more broad in that there's no mileage restriction in this. This would be, you're going 10 miles outside your service area to provide that.
100%.
So that's a little different.
In one, my curiosity still remains around that the responding shall be paid. But it doesn't dictate who's paying. We send stuff out of district, kind of at a handshake and don't expect remuneration, but this says shall be paid.
My sense was there was a tie over, was this 310, 340 were kind of connected, is that right? Maybe not, maybe it was just 310. As we, I think as Chief Johnson mentioned this morning, right, we're working to get through all the statutes. There are probably statutes that maybe need a little more work that we've identified, that we've had a subcommittee chew on and come up with some initial thoughts. And maybe at the end, there's still a handful of ones that we need some future work on. This may be one of those, I think, is because as we think about billings, as we think about responses and costs, that really ties kind of back into the larger DOT exercise and some of the discussion we had early on. I almost would see this one as, however we disposition future work once we've been through all the statutes, this is probably one that maybe needs a little bit more work and a little more focus. Yeah.
But it has a hole in it as well for the 190 or the mutual aid agreements. We have IA right off the bat. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't expect, excuse me, I don't expect reimbursement for those calls to assist. So that wouldn't be a you shall be paid. So you're right. It's kind of a gray area. Needs to be looked at further.
So are people comfortable leaving this one on a work plan going forward? I think there's some pieces around, like we addressed, shall be paid. And I think there's a question for me around the MOG plan rate, whether that includes factors in repairs and depreciation, whether that rate really was designed for this purpose, or if it's more for longer term mobilizations of resources. So I think there's a rate question, and as Mike addressed too, within the annexation piece, there's a triple the rate there. This is sort of refers more commonly to a MOG plan rate is what is used. So certainly more discussion, I think, there. So everybody comfortable leaving that on the work plan going forward? Okay. 478,340 payment of premiums or charges on contracts. Don't know. Christy, I don't think we have any feedback here. Have you had a chance to look at that anymore?
No, this is new to me. It escaped my to-do list. 478,340. No, this is not on my to-do list, so I apologize. Either I missed it or it just fell through the cracks.
Okay, no problem. So we'll leave this on the work list going forward.
If I recollect, one of the comments last time was with the new PERS updates and employee contributions. That was something that may affect or may not affect this. So.
Paid leave Oregon.
And it would be helpful for me if, when I'm asked to review a statute, if I understand what the issue is. From the last slide, I don't really understand what the committee's concerns were regarding this statute.
I think the two that I've heard, Christy, are any changes to PERS and then also paid leave Oregon. And does that mean anything in relationship to this?
Last one.
Is there anything we could underline in this section that would help Christie?
And Chief Hussey just showed me our notes from last meeting. The last time it was reviewed was in 1969. And so I think the question was, you know, again, in our charter, we're looking at modernization, and we don't want to change things just to change things, to modernize, but based on 1969 to now, you know, is there anything, new laws or things that conflict or cause issues associated with the statute? I think, Christie, that's at the heart of the discussion.
So this statute pertains only to paying premiums on insurance contracts and employee contributions. So what I'd like to do with the committee's permission, if you still want DOJ comment on it, is understand what the committee's concerns is and then get an insurance person in here to advise us regarding this piece, because it doesn't pertain, as I read it, to a lot of the things that I've been mentioning. It just says that the district may agree to pay premiums on insurance contracts and can collect those from the salaries.
While we're together, is there anything we can underline in this section though, before we move forward? That, well, for Christie, as well as if we do bring in somebody from insurance, they know exactly what it is that we're having.
Yeah.
What wording it is we're having issue with, and I'll underline it right now as you all say.
Does anybody have a specific issue with the section of this one that you're concerned about?
So then maybe we don't.
Yeah, I'm sort of wondering if we just don't leave it as is, if we can't identify something there.
I have one question. You can throw something at me for asking this, okay? In one, contributions for premiums or charges by employees shall be only on a voluntary basis. When a local ratifies a contract, whether or not they vote to approve or deny it, does this allow an employee to choose whether or not? Part of my curiosity stems around Janus rules. It could be a stretch.
Christie, any thoughts on whether this would allow an employee to opt out of essentially
Individual
any
employees, yeah.
individual employee opting out of participating in a group insurance plan of any type? Right? Is that?
As I read it, it would allow an individual employee to opt out of contributing for premiums that are paid pursuant to this statute. And so they would need to opt in, has to be voluntary. There can't be, okay, district agrees or perhaps even union agrees. And then it's automatically forced on the employee. However, that's exactly one of the provisions that I would want to run by both our insurance people and our labor people, because there may be case law that says, yeah, union has the right to speak for individual employees for these matters. And I'm not familiar with those tenets in case law.
And I think that's where the paid leave Oregon question came up, is we're buying alternate premiums.
And they don't have the ability to opt out.
Correct.
Paid leave Oregon.
I don't think that paid leave Oregon would fall under this statute. I'd have to think a little more deeply about that, but it says the district may agree to pay none, part, or all of the premiums or charges on insurance contracts or service contracts. Paid leave Oregon is just leave. It's not an insurance contract where you have to pay a premium on it. It's just a leave that you get withholdings taken out of your paycheck, and it's a statewide program. But those are good questions. If you'd like me to look into it, it'd take a little more time and effort.
What's the group's thought? Do we want Christie to dig deeper into that?
To Chief Hussey's point, I think the last sentence in section 1 is a concern for me.
Okay.
It would be nice just to know if the local ratifies a contract, if that clears this up.
Okay,
Right, but not all of my employees are covered by.
If non-represented employees.
Correct.
Yep.
And you can cost share will be voluntary.
So Christie, does that help kind of frame up maybe the questions and the issues to provide some feedback?
Yeah, I can look and see what's the effect of the last sentence in section 1 regarding union contracts that involve payment of premiums.
So that's the question with 340, right? Once
Yep.
that's answered, then folks are good with the rest of it. Okay.
Yeah, and I think could be a question there, Christie, around non-represented employees too, whether they can voluntarily opt out of that. So,
Right, that's more.
Out of the contribution requirement, out of any contribution requirement.
Yep.
Okay.
Because I would imagine most organizations have an internal policy that identifies benefits, that would identify employee sort of mandatory contributions, and whether or not an employee can opt out of those would be a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next section is 478, 410, power of district to levy taxes, borrow money, sell bonds, and create fees. The subcommittee feedback on this issue were essentially 6 voted for no change, 1 for minor change. No committee comments on that one. And then someone else referenced collecting the fees as part of the issue, more teeth in collecting cost-based fees. So I think most of the questions were around the fee portion and not the bonds or levy taxes. Is there any desire to change the language? There certainly was a comment around more teeth in collecting, but I didn't sense that anybody was concerned about the language in a fire district's ability to collect the fee or assess a fee, adopt an ordinance to do that. It's just sort of the process and how we add more teeth to that.
And that's been a long-standing issue, especially for people out of district. May have had a traffic accident or something, how that's pursued.
Right.
310 and 410 were really tied together in the OSFM staff subcommittee that we had, and I know that that's going to be on our list. It's one of our more challenging sections that we're going to be spending time on in April as well.
Yeah, I think the last sentence in section 4, the notwithstanding the failure to pay a fee created under the authority of this section is not a violation punishable under ORS 198-600. So I think that sort of speaks to the comment that somebody had about the teeth in collecting fees. So is this something we want to leave on the work plan as sort of the fees, how they're assigned, sort of what's an appropriate fee and
Got 310 and 340 on the carryover work group future work list so far.
okay.
What sentence did you say that was, Chief?
The last sentence in section 4.
There
Okay. Is everybody comfortable leaving 410 on sort of our work plan going forward? As far as clarifying fee and collections processes. Okay. The next section was 478, 470, interest on unpaid warrants. I think there's just a question about what warrants are. Anybody using warrants?
I had that one.
Nice.
I had the 2 DOR ones, and I did reach out. Folks remember Sergi and his staff, they came and presented. So Sergi has a new job. He's moving to Department of Emergency Management. So congratulations to him. And I got connected with another individual from Revenue, David. And he gave me one response and is working on the second one. So I had 470 and 505. 470 was around warrants, and he's doing some research on that and will get back to us, but hadn't had the time to do it. And then on 505, when we get there, I do have an answer that he knew of. And so waiting for 470, but have an answer for 505.
So we'll just leave 470 on the work.
Yep.
Work plan.
He said he should get back to me in a week or two. So once I hear back from them, I'll share that with the group and kind of where DOR is in terms of what their understanding is, difference in warrants.
Okay. Next up was 478, 485, notice of public hearing. The committee comments referenced an assistant as a broad term, unsure of how boards hire personnel. Christie's feedback in March was it's just best to move forward with it, likely as written. Christie, any clarification on that or?
Nope. I think that's just my recommendation. Ain't broke, don't fix it.
Okay. Like that. Any questions by the committee with that? I think we can remove this one off our work plan and just adopt it as is with no change. Okay. 478, 490. Election on question of dividing district into tax zones. We identified we'll revisit it with the full committee today. Concern sections will be underlined for DOJ to research and review with full committee at the April 17th meeting. So this is something I think next month we'll leave it on the work plan.
Yep.
And Christy, do you need more sort of guidance and clarification on what folks are looking for here?
It's my understanding that we've already provided that guidance regarding the tax zone issue, and that the guidance was while many districts, and we don't know, we've heard rumor of one district that has tax zones, but we've never, I don't know if staff was able to find one. While we don't use the statute, it could be a tool in the future. So just let it be in case we need to use it at some point. That was the DOJ advice. I don't recall being asked any specific, on any specific language changes. I could be wrong, but my notes indicate that that was our advice.
Last email was Christy wanted to know specifically, is there anything we want to underline in this section 490? And based off what's underlined, she can go back and do some work. Or like she said, if it's not broke, let's leave it and move forward.
We've maybe landed on it's not broke,
Okay.
so
Underlining necessary, okay.
Is everybody comfortable with leaving 478, 490 as is? Recognizing it's not a highly used issue, but does provide flexibility if an agency didn't want to do. Okay, hearing no comments, I think we can safely leave 478, 490 as is. And Christie, no further work on your part needed on this. Okay, 478, 505. Petition for tax zone by district collectors. Travis, you did some more work on
I
that?
did. So again, I reached out, DOR and, the upshot of that was the quick response to question 2 was there was at least one RFP that had used separate tax zones with different tax rates, and that was Crook County Rural Fire Protection District 1, which then changed its name to Crook County Fire and Rescue back in 04, 05, and ceased using separate tax zones at about the same time. So DOR knew of one back in 03, 05 that had 2 separate tax zones, and since has ceased using 2 separate tax zones.
Okay,
Out of curiosity, do the tax rates join together?
I don't
Or are
know
they still
the-
different?
I don't know the outcome of the tax rates in combining the 2 zones. I would assume, I'll make an assumption that the answer would be yes, but I can't 100% confirm that, but I would assume so. If it's one tax zone, then I would assume it's one tax rate.
I believe that it is as well. Are there any additional comments by the committee on this one or questions?
And again, I will see if there's anything else in my follow-up with DOR under 4.7. So just to make sure there's nothing else.
Christie from DOJ, you have any concerns about leaving this one as is?
I do not.
Okay. All right. Is the committee comfortable with that? Okay. Excellent. Well, we knocked several off the list there. We have a couple more that will stay on our work plan going forward. And I think our plan is to, I know Amanda has a working list of everything that we've checked off and agreed to leave as is, and then a list of what we're recommending changes for. And then also obviously a section of more work still needed. So I see that list getting smaller and smaller as we continue to meet. Appreciate everybody's feedback on that.
Chief, maybe
Yep.
just to make sure all the notes are square. So for future work, I've got 310, 340, 410, and follow up with revenue on 470, and if there is any more connection to 505.
Sounds good.
Okay, thanks.
Can I,
Yep.
can I clarify the third bullet point? Is that still work that DOJ needs to do for the group, or have we dispatched with that?
I still had 335 and 340 down, that we
Okay.
still need research done on.
I am reaching out on 340 right now, which is the premium contribution. And
Okay.
335, we can settle this offline, but I just want to know exactly what is needed.
All right.
Square?
Yep, I think we're good.
Okay.
All right, I think we're in tab 4 now, which is task force review of ORS 478, 702 through 990. This was all of our homework for this meeting. let's just maybe start going through the individual sections on that. It looks like mostly no to minor changes as we went through it, but I think we'll just go section by section, look at where there were comments for minor change. And so let's advance. There we go. 478-702, annexing lands into a district. No change, 7 people. 1 person had a major change, and I think that likely was the question around only 7 miles. And this is a new piece of statute, Senate Bill 1068. There was a lot of negotiations around this. This took multiple years to get through. The 7-mile discussion within that legislation, if I remember right, was related to the Insurance Service Office's 10W rating. I think most people recognize that 5 miles from a station receives a preferential rating, but for properties 5 to 7 miles, you may receive a 10W rating if it's also near a water source. And so that's where the 7 miles originated in the legislation that transitioned into this bill and into the new language. So it was just trying to anchor legislation into some objective standard that exists with ISO is how that developed.
And we know we had Chief Bullock join us last meeting, right? And he talked a little bit about this. And I think, to my knowledge, he's the first district to really explore this statute and move forward. And so I think my preference would be before we make any changes to it, we implement it first and see what the challenges would be before we try and change anything that was a pretty significant push over 2 legislative sessions. Isn't that right? 2 or 3.
And the local government law group has created a step-by-step process on how to implement that law, so.
That's okay. So that's 478-702.
It's a really long section. so we
Okay.
took out
I see that.
3 different-
So let's work all the way through that one. I'm not seeing any additional significant comments there. And I would agree with Travis. This is a brand new piece of legislation in Oregon. And my guess is there wouldn't be a lot of interest legislatively in changing it until it's been implemented and ran for a while. So I think it's likely one that we'll want to let set for a while and identify if there's problems with. So the next section that I have is it 875? 702, let's zip through 702. Yeah. Okay. All right, 478-875. Comments were may need to revisit if significant change is suggested. Maybe a minor change only if the language does not keep up with contemporary issues. Does anybody have more thoughts? Maybe who had a comment here? Not seeing any significant change that's recommended.
I think for this one, it's just continue to keep our eye on it. If we do adjust things elsewhere in the statute, that, you know, if we go back to the definitions page and make sure that there's consistency with definitions.
Yep.
A letter here from Dave with SDAO. What's the intent, or can we review that?
Yeah, I just asked him to look at that, and that was utilization of bonds to fund fire safety systems. And he wasn't aware of any agency that has utilized bonds.
Yep.
So my understanding is a district could issue bonds to generate revenue to provide grants for businesses to put in fire sprinkler systems or fire safety systems within buildings within their fire district. And he was not aware of any district that has done that, but statute does allow for that. And so, David, for those that don't know, is sort of the bond specialist for Special Districts Association. So he does pretty much all of their bond work. So that's why I had reached out to David to provide some background on that. Okay, 478, 850, no comments there. 855, no comments. 860, no change. All fire safety systems. 870. Yeah, no comments. 875, no comments, no change. 880, no change, no comments. If somebody has something as we buzz through those, just feel free to stop and visit about it.
I would assume that the recommendation moving forward is that we're gonna leave all these that you just mentioned as written.
Correct.
Okay.
So 478, 885, payment for a cost of fire safety system in multifamily housing, no change. There's a comment around revenue bonds. Any other questions on that one? I mean, I think the statute speaks to your ability to use bonds to do that. I don't know of anything beyond the district's permanent rate to do that. I think the rate in total indebtedness is that 1/4%, right? Of real market value, which is like $12.50 a thousand. So it's a really big number. But there is a restriction in total indebtedness that a district can incur. All right, so I'd say no change to 885. 910, adoption of fire prevention code. No change there. 478, 920, the scope of the fire prevention code. Travis, do you have anything from an agency here you want to address?
So we met and talked about 920, 924, and 927, I believe.
Okay.
So Claire is here. That's kind of over on her side of the house. I think the scope of the fire prevention code, I think these were kind of new comments. Ensure that fire chief or designee or similar officers designated by the board refer to the fire chief rather than the board. Consider revising the terms trash and wasteful materials.
You want to turn this over to Claire now, or?
And I would, maybe before I hand it to Claire, I think, you know, a couple thoughts as we think about 290 and 927. You know, there's some work that I think we want to continue to review, but there may be some opportunities to provide some efficiency. So as we met and talked about it, especially as we get into 2924, there may be some opportunities there, but I think, you know, based on the comments, and we want to understand a little bit more from the committee, what would be some of those opportunities to create efficiency. So that's the bulk of what we discussed, talked about. But Chief Drew, you're here with us. Thanks for coming.
No, I appreciate it. I think ultimately, Travis, you've totally captured all of those pieces. We had lots of discussion about ensuring that it speaks to the intent of the statute. But I think as we unpacked the earlier conversation, The importance of making sure that who is actually named in here remains critical. So it may require some additional review. So just basically highlighting the same things that you're adding in here.
So I think with 920, the comments, you know, that's something we can take a look at. Just, you know, I think that's pretty standard language or designee. I mean, that is consistent across the law. So that's something we can definitely take a look at. Officers designated by the board, refer to the fire chief rather than the board. Again, that's a theme, I think, as we look through the statutes, right? The delineation between board and the fire chief. And so just not having seen those until this morning, I think we can do a little review, but I don't fundamentally have significant issues, at least that jump out to us on 920 with those new comments. I mean, I think that's something we can take a deeper dive into, and I think probably in our April meeting or May meeting can close out 920 pretty easily. And then if we move to 924, approval of code by city or county required. And I don't know, you know, whose comment this was and would be interested in understanding more. My understanding of this issue is that it's an administrative issue, right? If a district covers multiple cities or counties, you need approval by those cities and counties. And so there may be some opportunities to create some efficiencies for fire districts and their boundaries by potentially making some modifications to this, but that's some work we're going to have to do and bring back to the group. But there may be some efficiencies here that could be gained by fire districts with this. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead with questions.
No, on 920, the 7, firing the issuance of permits by the fire chief. My recommendation is trying to align that with like DEQ or non-prohibited materials or something. I'm not gonna issue a permit to burn trash.
Great. So some clarity, sorry, I missed that, Chief Husky. Some clarity around trash and waste materials because fire
Just
chiefs aren't.
Modernize the language to align it with
Okay.
burn regulations. That's all.
Modernized to current terminology and standards. How's that?
Yep.
So, sorry, I went over 920. Anything else on 920?
I don't know that's in 920 or not, Travis. I'm thinking of the independent agencies in Oregon have the ability to enforce their own code. They're exempt organizations, is that correct? And is that covered in these sections that we're looking at here?
Exempt jurisdictions.
Yeah, there's a
Exempt jurisdiction.
separate, they're separate and apart. There's definitely some head nods to it. But it's not addressed in what we're talking about. There's actually an exempt jurisdiction statute.
Yeah, okay.
In 476.
It's in chapter 476.
Okay.
It's my understanding too that as far as 924 goes, if a district is not, we're just not amending, we're just using whatever the state. We don't adopt fire code, then it's not, then it doesn't need city and county. Is that correct?
That is correct. So if you're using the state fire code, which is influenced by and has the opportunity for stakeholder feedback at the statewide level, you certainly don't need to. If you adopt your own code locally as a district, that's when you would need to work with your municipalities.
I'm wondering if maybe we could maybe define that in 924 a little, might provide a little clarity. Yeah, I'm saying just to.
So if you just adopt the statewide Oregon fire code, like providing that in there, then this is not needed in essence.
Yeah, and it was explained to me one time that if we're not making amendments, then there's no need for us really to adopt it or resolve it at the district level. Because you're just using the wrong code. That's the way it was explained to me many years ago. But this kind of points that you have to do it regardless. But if you're not making amendments, then there's really no need to.
I do think there's some opportunities here, though. I know large jurisdictions that cover multiple cities and counties that may take the Oregon Fire Code and add in a little piece of their own, right? Would then have to take it to all 10 of the
Yes.
cities or
Essentially.
multiple counties to get approval if you're, adopting the Oregon Fire Code and adding in a city piece or two or a county piece or two. And yeah, so I think we do want to take a look at that to see if there are some efficiencies. I don't know that there are, but I want to take a deep dive into that. Make it easier.
Maybe it's wise to reference 476.
Yeah, I guess to that same discussion point. Could a district request exempt status and not change the code
Or go to the county.
or go to the,
I believe
not
the
sure.
answer is yes. However, I would want to make sure. I think it's interesting that you asked that question because I want to make sure that that's not my, the intent. So I will research that as well.
I've only seen POCs. I've never seen like an exempt contractor, what that looks like, but it'd be interesting to know if
Yeah.
that would require the exempt district that doesn't modify code to also gain approval for in the city and county.
She, that's what I'm. Christie.
Oh, okay. Christie, you have a question?
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the last speaker's question.
Christie, my question was, if a fire district was currently exempt or, seeking exemption, but they weren't modifying the state fire code, they weren't seeking amendments to, for what have you, would they still be required to go to each city and county and have it resolved at that level? Because the way the statute's written now basically just says you got to do it regardless. But my understanding, just becoming a new fire district in the last 6 months or 9 months, is that we as a district, we didn't make any amendments to the state adopted code. And when we did our plan of cooperation with the state fire marshal, they just basically said, you don't even need to resolve it at the district level, nor do you need to get city and county approval because you're just operating off of raw code. So the question was, if you claim exempt status under 476 and you don't modify that code, would you then also still be required to go to each city and county jurisdiction to have it resolved?
Understood. I don't have the answer to that. I thought you were asking something else. I'm sorry that I wasted the committee's time. If the committee would like us to look into that, we'd be happy to do it. But I don't have the answer offhand.
Sorry, Chief.
Sorry. I think, this is kind of a little bit of my wheelhouse in my career, and I'm a little confused about this section. So I think everybody, it might not hurt to just get a little clarity, or we just need to add a little definition or reference to 476, or if you're exempt versus non, or if you modify the code versus not. I think there might be a little bit of room for improvement on this.
I think I've got a couple different questions, and I think, what probably makes the most sense is let the agency take it back and we'll work with our experts on it, and then we'll reach out to DOJ as needed to help it. But I think I've got the essence of the questions, and I think Claire does too. Claire and her staff can kind of take point on that and then work with Christie as needed to help better define it.
That sounds good. Thank you.
And as part of your research, Chief, will you reach out to organizations that are in that position and get some feedback from them as well?
Yes.
In my former organization, which was a large fire district, I do remember anytime, every 3 years, it was always this big push because we had 4 counties, 13 cities that we all had to gear up to go to all of these meetings to. And my tenure there, we were exempt, and we did, I think, a couple cycles, we made an amendment, and then I think one cycle we're just raw code, but we still adopted it or resolved it at the district level, and then still went to each county and city. So I don't know. I don't know if it was just good practice or if we were required.
I think I can add a little bit of clarity. I think, and maybe this helps me understand what the question is. So if you take the state fire code and you're a district, you don't have to go to your municipality. If you take the state fire code and adopt it locally, or if you adopt it with additional components in it, regardless, you have to go to your local municipality for the nexus. So I think that's the piece, like regardless of 476, it's really about if you adopt it locally, regardless if you take it like bare bones.
Right. Okay.
That's the piece that I think will.
Yeah, that's, I think, just to solidify.
Yeah.
I learned that through this process, but I think others would, it
Right.
might help clarify that for
Absolutely.
the state.
And I do think there is an interest in, are there efficiencies, right? Like in different ways to do things that make it easier on.
Yeah.
So, I think those are all parts of the discussion I think we're internally having at this time. We'll bring something back to the group to kind of report out on. Claire and her staff will take point on that and then work with Christie as needed based on those conversations. If folks are comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Make sense, Chief?
It works for me. Anybody have concerns with that? Okay. 478, 930. No change recommended there. 478, 940. Filing and posting of the fire prevention code.
Chief, can you go back?
Yep.
To 927.
Yep.
I guess this would kind of tie into 924 in the first sentence there. This is a district adopting a fire prevention code. What if a district doesn't? Or that same discussion point, we just use, maybe there's some cleanup there too.
Yep. Okay.
Sorry about that.
No, appreciate it.
Claire, you got that?
It should do.
Okay, so 930, no comments there. 940, a lot of comments there regarding filing and posting of the prevention code. Comments around smaller unstaffed stations, whether they're posting it. Having it as a central station should be sufficient. Any further comments on that, or do you want to address this in your code work?
I think just from some general conversation that we had in-house, a lot of the comments seem like there are a lot of modernization. I mean,
Right.
this was really written during a time where you would literally have a book on everybody's shelf. I think ultimately, as long as there is a copy available, I don't know that it's necessary. I know there was a lot of feedback about each individual station having one, and I think we could work through that. And I know that there's also some aspects about electronic availability, which also would be appropriate as well.
So what I'm hearing is a potential modernization of the last line where essential says, and a copy shall be posted at each fire station with the district. We recommend some modernization of that statute. Essentially, the public has access.
Or on
To
the website.
Yeah. So Amanda, you'll track that recommended change there. Any other comments on 940? Right, 960. Burning of certain materials permitted only with the permission of the fire chief. No change, 8 people, there's one major change. The comment is DEQ submitting this info daily to SFM. How is that information shared with fire agencies? How are they notified?
We had a fairly robust conversation around this and, there's been, let's say, a lot of coordination and collaboration over the last 3 years, ever since I've been at OSFM. I think one of my first weeks, I started on a task force with DEQ and ODF, Department of Ag, DEQ on this kind of, call it open burning, right? And burning of materials and smoke management type things. So there's been a lot of ongoing work that has occurred, and I think some modernization has occurring and will continue to occur. And so maybe I'll highlight that and then see, get perspectives around the questions. One, there's a website, openburning.org. And again, work in progress with DEQ as a lead, ODF, OSFM, Department of Ag. Working on a Can I Burn mapping tool. So a website where folks can go and see if they can burn. And then there is a burn hotline also. And so, you know, to the question, is DEQ submitting this info daily to OSFM? I think across those platforms, that information is daily coming out. And I think will continue to be refined into the future. I think in development and probably what's most useful is a debris burning app, right? And that's in development, the Department of Forestry. And that ultimately, I think, would be placed, you know, an app where folks, both from the, you know, private side and also the fire district side, could go to get information. But Chief Cook, you have a question?
More of a comment. We've really been working on standardization, and, you know, the last line on section 1, the deputy, the fire chief has power, looking at designee of the fire chief. So verbiage in that just to standardize, because I know a lot of stuff, I don't have any deputy or battalion chiefs.
So add some language around or designee.
Yeah, just standardization of verbiage.
Great. So Claire, I know this is kind of, you were part of these conversations and kind of maybe over on your side of the house. So I think is DEQ, to the question, is DEQ submitting the info daily to OSFN? I don't know that it comes direct to OSFN, but there's multiple sources and places where it exists. And then how's that information shared with the fire agencies? So I think there's a couple existing tools. Then I think there's probably more tools coming online to really get at, you know, how are they notified daily? That's my sense, and the work that's been ongoing for 3+ years and the conversation we've had internally. So I don't know the major change piece, you know, what that recommendation is, but in our research and in our discussions, those are kind of the tools, how it works and what exists, but super open to thoughts. I did also cross-reference Chief Johnson, you know, is this out of scope or in scope?
Yep.
And felt like, you know, it was in scope, right? Because it speaks very specifically to field learning, which is out of scope for 25-22. I do know we've also kind of touched on, and I don't remember what ORS it was, another topic kind of similar to this earlier on. And we chose as a committee to just leave it as is due to a lot of complexities. So that's kind of the research to date, Chief, unless I missed something that you want to add.
I think the only thing to add was we also did a joint policy bulletin that is also available on the website as well, because there tends to be a lot of questions around this aspect as well. So we were really focused on structural fire jurisdictions and what authorities came from that, which is a very narrow piece of what this conversation is. But I think you nailed it. Just the conversations continue to exist with those partners as well. And online versions, online mapping tools, online applications are available or are coming online.
And then lastly, I've got a note, you know, to include Chief Cook's point, you know, to modernize the narrative where we see it in statute around could or designate be added in small fire districts who don't have battalion chiefs, don't have assistant chiefs or chief deputies or deputy chiefs. Would you make a designate somebody else within your agency? So Chief Cook, I've captured that. Thank you.
Any other comments in this section?
Just in cross-referencing 930 and 960, I would go back to the point of 930 does speak to when a district has adopted a prevention code, and subset section 2 says no person shall burn waste or trash. So sure if that ties into this, but it'd be that greater conversation of adopting a code.
So that's section 2 and 930.
Yes. This section 2 references a permit and 960 references without permission, only with permission, which essentially would be a permit.
If I may. Section A, 8A on 960. Permits required for field burning authorized pursuant 468. So I know in some areas, the Homestead Act is used in lieu of this, which is a challenge. The Willamette corridor, not so much, but the rest of the state, that can be a challenge. And so I'm wondering if there could be some clarification. I had 2 chiefs come and talk to me about that, to see if that was something that we could take a look at.
I would think this is specifically referencing in 8A field burning, which I think would be out of scope. So I think that Homestead, if the Homestead Act is related to field burning, then I think it would be out of scope for this committee.
So I'd amend that and make a comment for the state park marshal to take a look at the homestead versus no field burning.
Apologize, I missed that piece.
I would have commented anyways.
I appreciate it.
All right, I was at 478, 962 through 5. Let's go 478, 960, subsection 6, no changes. 478, 965. Is there any comments that we haven't talked about in 960 before we move on? Okay, let's go to 965. Recovery by district of costs for suppressing unlawful fires.
I feel like we pumped this one to that cost recovery and reimbursement conversation. It's got-
Yeah. Let's just make sure that 965 is included in that cost recovery discussion. Any other comments on that? Okay, 478, 970. No recommended change. $972 is an application for a name. Just one comment. It's fine if this is actually what happens. If not, then it's time to change it. From the agency, any comments on assigning a name?
Dr. Gemmell actually runs this process now. We've reviewed this extensively.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily a name. We assign an FDID. That's true. So the name, by and large, we leave up the agencies to determine what their name is. Let us know, but once we assign an FDID number, and I'm not sure if that needs to be updated in here. There's some other language in the statute that talks about how the name can be changed anytime, which in practice is the case, but the ID number, we don't change that number. In practice, it's like once you're assigned a number, that's your unique identifier. So there could be a couple of areas in this section of the statute that could be updated. But probably not the end of.
Hey, Doc, just kind of a question. So when two agencies merge together,
Yep.
the new FDID
Yep.
is assigned.
Yes. Yes.
With that.
Yep.
I think that's the next section, right? So in 972, is there a desire to clarify that it's really the FDID that is assigned by the agency? Is that what you're saying?
I think that is the actual process. We assign a unique identifier or unique identification number to each agency.
Even under the heading, you could say the word unique identification or something to that effect, strike. But I think that's not.
So I think this would be a good one. Let us, chief, if the committee's great with it, let us go work on that and see if there's any recommendations. So I'll put this in the future to do work. 972, and it's the good Dr. Gimley's task.
I just work here.
Awesome. Okay, next up is 980, identification name formed by consolidation and merger.
Lump this in under maybe 972.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And assign to the good doctor.
Yeah, because this one doesn't really deal with the identification number as much. It just deals.
It's a
with
lot of
the name itself. Yeah, so we'll just need to add the number piece there. 478, 982, the reuse of names of dissolved districts.
See a hand raised by Dr. Gimmel. It's 3 for 3, sir.
Very good. 990, penalties. Yeah.
So in the event of a dissolution of a district, the name of the district is available for assignment to another district. So I just went through this process and we had McMinnville Rural Fire Protection District. It's City of McMinnville Fire Department. We had 2 FDIDs. We became McMinnville Fire District. We were assigned a new FDID. So is this saying then that if Yamhill Fire District could take that name of McMinnville Rural if they wanted to, even though they have a different FDID?
I don't, technically, that's, you could interpret it that way. I don't think that was the intent, but I'm not a DOJ lawyer, but yeah, I think the intent is, you know, two agencies dissolve in your scenario, and then they could just go back and just use the old.
So I would
do
have
think
access per se to help if we wanted to rename it Yamhill Rural Fire District, but I'm just concerned that
yes,
I don't think anybody would do that, but I mean.
right. But yeah, but reading the law is like, well,
I think in process, typically what has happened, we've had some new fire agencies that have asked us, so this is outside, like there's the regulations and the regulatory aspect of things, but then there have been some folks that have reached out and said, would it cause confusion if I get this name? Or has this name previously been used? So we've been able to walk through that. Typically agencies, in fact, in my experience, always agencies have chosen a separate name, something that is for their community. Which I bring that up only because I think it wouldn't complicate this matter. I think it really is it's something that's our scope. The other piece is that typically that name is still out there. So we've had agencies that have merged and then have dissolved, and they have then been able to go back and use their old name because it just, nobody else has picked that up. So I bring that up only for process.
Which, to your point, would also why you wouldn't dissolve the other FDIDs. They're just kind of just still existing with their old names. And would, to your point, Claire, would that mean the agency would also have authority to decide? If I wanted to create Sisters Camp Sherman, Yam Hill Fire District, would you, and I submit that application, would the agency have the ability to make that call and say, no, that's too similar to?
I think that question is part of what we need to review as process.
Yeah.
Because I have my gut on that, but I also want to make sure I'm back at the intent. Every time we get those types of questions, we always go back and see what the regulations are.
I guess what I heard in the previous discussion, right, is when we say the word name, it's really FDID number and not the name of the fire district. Right, and I guess my sense on this one was if a district was dissolved and FD 0001 is no longer being used, if somebody wanted FD 001, they could have it. That doesn't mean you could be McMinnville Rural Fire District. It means you could be 001. Is that, am I thinking of that right?
The way the statute is currently written, that's the way it would allow for, like, I think it needs to be cleaned up to say, we issue FDI, a unique identifier.
Yep.
And the number. In practice, we don't, 001, and you dissolve and you merge with someone else, we issue 002. Another agency says, wow, we really want 001. We don't just turn around and say, yeah, sure, it's available. Here you go. In practice, we just don't do that. For the case of, say, your agencies merge together, you decide, oh, this isn't working. You don't like the snow, whatever reason, and you will become your own agency again, but you want your old FDID number back because we're your own agency. And in that scenario, say, okay, it's available. But typically we just don't reactivate just again.
Yeah. I think that will clean it up if we clarify the ID, because it's up to the agency to select the name,
Yes.
but it's the state that assigns the identification number, or whatever name you had.
Identifiers.
Yes.
Who is 001?
I can find
I think my notes show there's a handful, I'm gonna call them a handful of statutes around, names and FDID numbers. And there's probably some good work that we can do to really clean it up and make it clear. I don't see that as impacting fire agency. I think it's just, would be helpful to add clarity around how we are operationalizing FDID. I don't think it would impact anything, but I think there's some opportunities for us as an agency department. I've got 3 or 4 of them that the good doctors can take a look at.
It's the DARE RFPD.
A dare, number 1.
Are
Really?
you kidding? A dare?
Interesting.
All right, let's power through these last couple, and then we can have a break and grab a bite. 478, 990 penalties. Just one comment, curious how the enforcement penalties happen through local LE. How is it working essentially? I don't have any experience with this.
So we have 2 members that have the site extended by the county sheriff. And we rarely use it because it's not where they're most successful. It's unused even though we have it.
They like limited duty sheriffs.
Well, they have a citation book extended and it's for primarily burning for some of our agricultural items that were down there. Some life safety issues that were addressed earlier.
And just referencing back to 930, a district would have to adopt a local code or adopt the fire code locally, right? To be able to utilize 478 and 990 and issue a citation. Is that correct?
Which would also make more discussion on that point. If we don't, then can we not enforce penalties?
We can look at that as well. We can make sure that tie is clearly answered.
I think legally it would be good practice to adopt the code with amendments that talk about enforcement of penalties.
I think this is a broader subject that, so for a lot of the majority of the smaller districts, just for us, for example, the city actually has empowered the fire district to go ahead and give out tickets. Well, the problem with that is anything litigious, the financial, the fire department can't absorb going to cost. We don't have the personnel. We don't have the teeth to go ahead and enforce it, and either does the city. So it's something that's needed, but I don't think financially, I don't think the resources are there to enforce this for the majority of the smaller districts. So if there was some way to do that, either at the state level or some other way, I think that should be looked at.
Claire, you're going to provide some follow-up for Travis on that one?
We will loop that back in with the other parts that I'm looking to. Yeah, I can get my name assigned to that one.
I was just gonna, Chief Cook just made me think about this. It does sometimes feel, I'll use the term, as a fire district, especially as we have inspectors or company officers that are out, it's almost like a toothless tiger. As you have this, you get penalized for fees, but then who's the person that's making that action legally? If you don't have it amended, resolved at the board level. I know in my experience, the way we've articulated that is either through the city, if you're serving a city, then maybe through city ordinance, or at the county, you use a code enforcement officer. But maybe there is, if you're a deputy of the state fire marshal, is there a enforcement tool? It could be digging a bigger hole here, but
I think it gets big quickly. I mean, fireworks is a great example.
yeah.
You know, statewide, we have rules and regulations, but enforcement, as we all know, we see all the notes come out from everybody, including state fire marshal, that there's nowhere to go with that. So
I think Redmond went as far as becoming like the sheriff's office gave them limited duty or light duty or something. I think Mooney did that for that reason of burning fireworks, having to, versus resolving it at their board level. But there might be some.
this has kind of been a process in the rules that just has never, as I said, I don't think it's for this group, but this is definitely a process that needs to be looked at, because we go to DEQ, for the guy that lights the 45 couches in the backyard. Do we call the state fire marshal? There's just not an algorithm for us to go to, especially in the smaller districts. I think that's going to be some other table.
I think for big districts too, frankly, I totally agree. There's a lot of work that can be done here. Thank you for bringing that up too.
Claire is going to dig into this and report back.
Sorry.
And Amanda has it on the workflow, so we won't forget. So. Great discussion though, because I think this does impact everybody statewide at some level or not. And I know our agency wrestled with whether we adopt a local code or just enforce the state code. And I think a lot of agencies are likely in a similar boat. And what does that mean if you don't? What authorities do you have? I mean, there's just a lot that I think people are for folks. So. All right. 478, 450 tax for road lighting. There was some discussion about that. I think what we heard from Christy last time is just recommend leaving it as it is, even if there's only one or nobody currently using it. It's a section statute you have, and you probably shouldn't eliminated. Is everybody comfortable with that? Anybody feel differently about that? Okay. Wow. We made it through it. So, next steps, I think we have a list of work that, will continue, more research that will be done. Amanda's tracking that, for all of us for homework. I think it likely April, some of this work we'll have answers to, and, we'll come back. I think our hope is that that list of outstanding research and work narrows as we move forward. And we can get closure on a lot of those statutes, so. Anything else from the agency? Dina, or,
So I've got a list and maybe I'll just run through it real quick, just to
Okay.
capture it, and maybe kind of summarize. So I've got, some thinking around 920, around modernization, Chief Hussey, to your point, language around trash and waste materials. So we'll take a look at that. The 924, 927 piece I've got, that the agency's gonna do some more work on. I've got the 940 modernization piece, and that's really around, filing and posting of the fire prevention code. And does that make sense? Is there new things to think about there, which I think we all, agree? 960, the word designee in there, Chief Cook, to your point around, small rural fire protection districts. And then I got it, the Dr. Kimmel, numbers, 65, 72, 80, 82, and then I've got 990. I think I captured all of the work that, needs to be rolled together, plus the stuff that we had on the work plan that we already covered. Just 310, 340, 410, 470, and a relook at 355.
nice.
Is that correct?
That's exactly what I recall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying we have to do this, but, on subcommittee or anything like that, but I'd be willing, if there's discussion points on 990, I'd love that you brought it up. I do think there's a lot more conversation that needs to happen around this. It does impact all of us, so I'd be willing to, if you guys run into ideas or brainstorming, if you want to talk, I'd be happy to chime in on that.
That's awesome, Chief. I appreciate it. I think from the agency perspective, we'll kind of pull it in, chew on it, figure out what it all means, and then bring it back. And if we need to grab some more people, when we bring it back to the group, well, that would be an opportunity for folks that are interested. Just tell you, we've looked at it, we've reviewed it. There's quite a bit of meat here. We need a subgroup to work on it. I think that could be one of the recommendations, or bring back a recommendation. If the group agrees with it, then we can move on.
Yep.
If that's fair with you, Chief
Yep.
Johnson.
No, perfect. All right, we had on the agenda 1125 for feedback on 478, 490. I think we've covered 490. That's the zones,
Yep.
right? I think we're actually good there, unless somebody had any further comments.
I think we're good.
I think so too. That's the election on question on dividing district into tax zones, creating the zones. So my sense is that's done from an agenda perspective. I think we're good there. So the next I have on my agenda is a working lunch. So let's take a break. Let's grab a bite. Then after that, we'll turn it over to Dr. Gemmel for an update and talk about future work, and we'll get out of here. Nice work, everybody.
And that was a 478. That was a big section. This last one.
No, you did.
Can we turn
Yeah.
off the?
No, there's a lot of them.
Can we turn all these off?
Yes, go ahead.
Back on. Amanda, are you good? Online?
Cameras are back on, all right.
Cameras on, we're good.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for rejoining us and we've got just a few presentations or one presentation and maybe a quick wrap up and then we'll be done for the day. So Dr. Gemmell, take it away.
No pressure. Good thing I brought some notes here. So in tab 5, for those in the room, this is really just a follow-up to a request that we had from our last meeting. Last meeting, as a refresher, presented a visitor influx map by fire district. And in that map, we analyzed a couple different data sets of data to try to estimate the number of visitors above and beyond the typical standard population within each of the districts. We used the ODOT traffic monitoring system, as well as Travel Oregon visitor counts, and then came up with an estimation of here's what we think of the number of visitors within each district. The request that came up was, well, what does the map look like if you factor in the number of firefighters and their type, if they're volunteer or career? So we went back and we pulled the numbers that we have on file for each of the fire agencies as far as the number of firefighters and whether they're career or volunteer. We assigned a value to that number to weight them. So if they were career firefighter, they got a weight of 1. If they were a volunteer, we gave them a weight of 5. Just not saying that volunteer firefighters are worth less than a career, but just in terms of response, just logistics, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times they have to travel in from their home, they have to get ready, and then they go out to the call. So we just weighted them a little bit less than a career. And then as we were working through the process, we realized a lot of agencies provide coverage or contract with other jurisdictions like Salem and Salem Suburban. And so realizing that some agencies didn't have any firefighting staff. So what we did is we looked at the areas, the contracting agencies and who they contracted with, and then if an agency had a contract to provide coverage with another agency or agencies, what we did is we factored that mileage in of those contracted jurisdictions into the main fire agency. I'm not saying this very eloquently, but and then we normalize that weighted value for each of the staff available by the mileage. So basically we came up with the number of staff per mileage, covered mileage. And then that's how we took that number to be able to weight it and factor it into the number of visitors above and beyond to come up with an overall, the key says burden index, but visitors aren't a burden. They add a lot to Oregon, but that's how we came up with this index that we have in front of you. So in general, I think some of the different districts, especially those that are combo or volunteer and provide coverage with a contracting jurisdiction, you'll see that maybe they went from the last map, they were like a medium, and now they're at a high. So like the visitors add an extra layer, greater burden, if you will, better term, to them and to their workload. So, but in general, it's pretty similar. The coast tends to be very, very high along the Columbia River Gorge. That's pretty high, and it's not necessarily, there were some changes there, especially in Columbia River Gorge.
outside of, Hood River, the further east you go, and that's not necessarily because the number of visitors are higher, it's just because of the staffing that those agencies have. And then down in Klamath, the Klamath, County, Klamath Falls area, that went from like a medium up again because of staff. But that was the methodology that we used. And I just want to throw out not a caution that this map should be viewed not as like an exact formula, but more like how you look at those collage pictures where you guys take a step back and, oh yeah, I can see that's a ship or whatever. And then you get up close and it's made.
So there's something Monet.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It still gives us, we're confident that it gives us a general picture, right? Of the impact of visitors on our fire jurisdictions, but keyword being, it's a general. So, we could always, in the future, like you can see the formula at the top, you can see what the final weights are that we use. We can adjust those weights. That will change some of the districts. But the overall trend that you see, the coast will still be higher. The valley's still going to be lower. But yeah, that's the map. Those are the factors that we use and the weights that we used as well.
Dr. Gummel, quick question on the annual fire agency profile.
Yes.
I think you addressed it's more staffing and capacity for response, right? But it didn't take into account emergency response data itself, the number of 911 calls.
No, so that's actually, I think, another study that's out there that we're looking at, that we wanted to do. It's on our board, and that's really coming up with a capacity model that we can apply by looking at factoring in, okay, here's what you have for your staff, here's the call volume you have, looking at apparatus and developing a model. There's models out there that exist, but looking at something that meet Oregon's unique needs to really answer that question.
Yeah, because as I look at Central Oregon or Bend specifically, I think before it was high. And then when the staffing layer is added to it, it sort of moved down to a moderate, but just knowing how they operate, when the population density increases that much, they really don't have the capacity any longer because the call activity increases so greatly.
Yep.
That this, I'm not sure that the capacity, absent response activity during tourist times or in tourist locations.
Yeah. And there's
There's
a couple of reasons for that. And it is because the constraints of the model. Like models are great because they kind of let you generalize stuff, but there's definitely constraints to them. When you roll out the model, one of the constraints is it's relative to the volume of visitors that we see normal to the normal population. So like with traffic and travel to Oregon, so like Bend typically has a higher year-round visitor than the rest of the state.
Right.
So the summer months, typically you don't see a greater necessarily percentage increase over the number of visitors compared to the rest of the state. So that's one constraint. The other constraint is then what we do is we calculate the scores for all the jurisdictions, and then we do a quintile, we divide it by quintile. So then it's relative to the rest of the state. So when you look compared to the rest of the state, it's like, well, you're not being as impacted compared to, Coos Bay or something like that. Doesn't mean that, like you said, capacity is something different. Doesn't mean that you're not over capacity.
Right.
It's just you're comparing yourselves to the capacity of the visitor influx of the rest of the state.
Yeah.
So,
no, very good.
Yeah, that's why it's the collage. Look at it like a collage, like, oh yeah. Okay.
Any other questions or comments for Dr. Gummel? Appreciate it.
Yeah, this is just a step. This is just a step in the bigger question.
I think as we think about the question, right, the workload associated with visitors, right, is really at the crux. of the matter. I think about the rural fire protection districts, fire districts around the state, how they're funded, the limitations that we talked about with 47, 50, their budgets are really focused at kind of the local level, and you add 20 or 30,000 people into that, right? The strain that it puts on fire districts, I think, is highlighted by the different maps that we've looked at, and I think as this group and other work groups continue into the future, right, really across. So, you know, the dot exercise and other exercises that we're doing, this just highlights it from my perspective, whether you lay staffing over it or not. Yeah, 20 to 40,000 people on any given weekend.
Yeah.
Into a local fire district, they're not staffed to deal with that and manage that, right? So call volume does go up, and that puts a significant strain on first responders in those local fire districts. So I really value change.
Yep.
Question. Dr. Emil, are there layers available to look at, the base layer, the visitors? I think there's other values to this information for maybe obtaining grants.
Yeah.
You know, looking at the transportation and stuff and.
Yeah. So we have the transportation numbers, we have the visitor influx that we use. So we'd be happy to share that information. Great point.
All right, any other questions or comments? Dr. Kimmel?
Eric, quick question for you, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the quintiles. Did you find that those broke pretty cleanly? But it was pretty easy to say, you know, are the categories pretty close together, or are they are there natural breaks amongst those?
There is natural breaks. Okay, that's
So it wasn't a matter of maybe necessarily, I mean, there are still going to be some that are on the boundary between high and very high, right? But by and large, you found that the bins were pretty easy to set. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? And it's just a great resource. Dr. Kimmel, thank you so much for your work. All right, next on the agenda is recommendation reviews. Travis, we've got your name by that.
Thanks, Steve. So I think this kind of parlays into next steps and future work also. And, you know, we've captured, I think, you know, I've got the list that I've run through for today, which was, you know, work that we did from 310 all the way up to 505, or from 260 to 505. We captured, I think, 5 or 6 elements that we need some future work on. And then we also captured the future work that we needed to do based on the review of 702 to 990 today. What I was hoping to do, Chief, is we can maybe connect your section and mine, and Amanda's got a spreadsheet up, and really walk through all the work. We think about when we first kicked off as a group, we had the ambitious goal of working through all of ORS 478. And we've done that. So everyone should give themselves a quick pat on the back. Our work is not done, though. We know we have more work to do, but we've at least made, as we discussed as a group, and our goal and intent to make a cursory review and identify statutes that needed further work. So I wanted to just take a few minutes maybe to close out today, and again, we can tie it over into next steps and future work with the spreadsheet, how we've kind of progressed through all of the different statutes. And so Dan has done a good job in capturing all of our work across 478 and where things landed. And so I would encourage folks as we walk through this to ask questions, or Cassie's driving, someone's driving. So ask questions if that's not how you recall it. You know, let's stop and take a time out and see if we need to go back and revisit something. But my hope is, again, you know, this group is charged with producing a report. We can work through this and highlight all the ones that we've agreed that there's no change on. That takes those kind of off the table, and then leaves a subset that we have to do work on in the future. And, you know, that ultimately will lead to what needs to go into a legislative concept. We'll also highlight for the group that the agency is in the middle of developing our legislative concepts, policy option packages for 25-27. And so we do have a placeholder, as a legislative concept for the work that comes out of this task force. And we've already started conversations with the governor's office around that placeholder. And ultimately we'll be submitting it as a placeholder based on the work of this group and taking in recommendations. That legislative concept is the vehicle that the agency needs, or a legislator needs, or stakeholder needs, to run ORS changes through the legislative process. So I'm not 100% sure yet if a stakeholder or a legislator is going to pick it up, but from the agency's perspective, we wanted to make sure that we had a placeholder in for this important work. So that's already identified in our legislative concepts, and we're doing work on that right now. So as we continue to refine and we continue to make recommendations, ultimately, if the group supports it, those could go into a legislative concept. That's how the law in 478 would actually change. Just so folks are kind of tracking where we're at in the biennial budget process. All right, so let's go to the top. So we started with definitions, and I'm just going to walk through them. And again, folks, please jump in. So we started with definitions. We said we'd revisit that at the very end based off of the work that we're doing in other chapters. So that'll be kind of the final check. We looked at 02 and 04, and the recommendations were to leave as is per the discussions that we've had with the group. So committee recommended to leave that as is. 010, we need to potentially maybe take another look at and discuss some additional thoughts on that. There's a portion of it that we were going to leave as is, but as we go back and capture our future work, we'll probably pull in 010 and just have a conversation, because I don't think as a committee we finally landed the plane on that. So that's when we'll revisit. Qualifications for directors, 050. We've had numerous conversations around that. I think that's another one that we need to bring back. And so that's in work that we've done that I want to bring back to the group and just get affirmation that yes, no change, or this is what we're recommending. 090, going forward, that's that's leave as is. We did talk a lot about the timing of that and the effect of 1939, but ultimately the recommendations were to leave as is for 090 and 100. Now, 115 was county governing body to determine territory of district. That's another piece. Back up with 050 that we want to bring back. And so that'll be some work that we need to think about. And again, these are all bring back to the group. There wasn't consensus on leave it as is or do something different with it. So we'll need to bring it back and see if we want to make a recommendation on it. We've got let's see, where was that?
You're up to 120.
120 inclusion of forest land in the district. I think that was out of scope for 25-22. So that's as is, along with 130 and 140. So along with 150. So those were all just leave as is based on the parameters of 2522. Got 155. And I think that's another one that we're going to have to pick back up. Lots of discussion around levies and taxes. And when we did the dot exercise, that's a super tie-in. Go ahead, Chief.
I was just going to ask if it would be appropriate on those that are out of scope, that we identify them as out of scope instead of move forward as written, because it would infer like the others that we reviewed it and we're taking action to support it. So
that's a great recommendation.
I'll update the spreadsheet.
I see Amanda capturing the notes. So the ones that are out of scope, we'll highlight those as out of scope to identify that. 160, that's probably move forward as written. We'll have to take a look at that and see if that's out of scope or not, but we'll take a review through all of Chief Johnson and identify the ones that are out of scope. January, we were very productive in January. So we got a lot accomplished in 210 through 250. With subcommittee work and all of those, we're just moved forward, no change. Fire chief headquarters, fire evacuation routes, emergency medical services. Believe that we still need to do a little work here. At least I want to pick that one back up and make sure that we close the loop on that, but I feel like there's another touch there. Along with 270 and 280, I believe. And so I know we've had multiple conversations, but I feel like with sub-working groups and bringing stuff back, you want to package that all up and bring that back with a recommendation that says these changes or leave as is. So there's supposed to be there. 290, 300. Let's move forward all the way down to 308. 310. I was trying to remember where we landed in 310. Full committee.
That's what it's tied closely with 410. And that's another one of our challenging ones that we're going to be readdressing in April.
Okay, so 310, 410 are connected, so that'll be an April topic. We talked through 315. We had a couple chiefs join us. So Chief Palmer, Chief Bullock. Feel like that one's still, I feel like 315 probably was closed out, but
It's still,
we probably want to come back and just make sure that we're closed out with the committee on it. So we'll do that with 315, 325, 335, no change. 340. Let's see, payment premium charges and contracts, conversations.
That's the insurance one.
That's the insurance one. So that was one that we talked about today, right? So we'll need to bring that back, and Christie's got that one. Got 355 through 390, which was all moved forward. 410, we talked through that, I believe, and there's more work, and that's on the list that we have to take a look at least it's on my list from today's summary. So more work on 410. 450 was the next one. I believe that we covered that one today and that we're closing that one out, and so we can just say leave as is. For that one, so 450 can show as closed out. I talked a little bit about DOR, so I will bring that one back along with 505. So those will come back to the group. 480, 485, I believe is closed out. That was as is. We decided that as a group today.
If I might.
Yeah.
On 478, 485, it still says update to reflect current Oregon public notice laws, but it does not need to be updated for that. I spoke with a staff member and we clarified that.
Yep, awesome.
Okay, thanks.
I heard that, Christy. I think the spreadsheet's just catching up to the combo, so.
You guys are moving fast and furious.
I believe that one is closed out, so 45 is done. 490 we talked about. I believe Chief Johnson, did we close out 490?
yeah, at the end of each meeting, I go back through and clean them up, this up.
Yep, but I think we closed out 490 today, so that one will show is done. 495 done. 500. Where did we land with 500?
That's a DOR.
DOR, the 500 and 505 with Department of Revenue. 560, 665 will show out of scope already. That's great. So we'll show which ones are out of scope. And then we have everything that we did today. And I think we have good accounting of what's closed out and what's not. And so at the end, for next meeting, we'll have this spreadsheet updated based on decisions that we made, Today, both, in that section up above, along with 702 to 990. And once we have that updated, we'll send it out to the group, so you have a copy of it from this meeting, and you can see the different pieces. So I think I just wanted to really spend a couple minutes, and he said it's a roadmap to all the great work that we've done already. I'd say like 70-ish% of statutes that we've looked at, recommending just leaving as is. The other 30%, there's a lot of big topics there, especially as we think about, one major pieces like zones and taxing districts and those types of things. And then also a handful of kind of minor cleanup, some of that stuff we talked about, some clarifications today that I think can add and go into a legislative concept. So I wanted to take just a minute to highlight it for the group of all the significant work that we've been through. We'll update it, we'll send it out to the group. And then, as we think about next steps, and Chief Johnson and I can talk a little bit about that, like how do we want to go about picking up those big rocks that has either been in a subcommittee that we've talked about with the full group, and how do we want to move those pieces forward? So that's just the thumbnail of the roadmap of where we started and where we're at. And I'm super impressed that we got through a whole chapter of law. That is very, very, very impressive to get through all of 470. So recognize there's still work ahead. So
Thank you, Travis. Appreciate it. And just echoing that thought, a lot of great work. I'm just impressed how everybody's showing up and have reviewed the statute, have good ideas and engaging. Appreciate that. And certainly Christy at DOJ, tremendous help, Christy. Thank you so much for your support of the committee as we move forward and what we've addressed already. So great work. And I think some that we have outstanding, I think we've got a really good direction on. I'm really interested in the code piece and the discussions that we've had around that too. I think that's really going to be an important piece of work for the committee going forward. So appreciate all of that. And I think, as I think forward, right, we're going to continue to whittle this list down to where we have mostly everything done and the framework for the recommendations for the LC. But we'll, we certainly still have those bigger topic areas out there that Travis talked about, those great big issues that maybe aren't in statute today. And how do we take those and how do we fit them into this process? How do we fit them into a potential LC? I think that'll be a really important part of this committee's work going forward too. So great work done, lots of good stuff to come for sure. Quick question on the LC. I know we have a mandate to report out on the work of the committee by September. I'm just thinking about the timing for an LC or sort of a framework for that. What does that look like?
So agencies have a timeline around submitting our legislative concepts and POPs. And so we are right in the middle of that process. We ultimately will submit those to the governor's office, I think the end of April, beginning of May. I think will be really the start of the conversation around our legislative concepts and POPs. That'll continue to go through the process. Ultimately, I think that process as we work through it, really has kind of a June-ish timeline. And then agencies also have to begin preparing as we get into August around what it looks like for final LCs and POPs. But I'm looking towards June as kind of the real beginning, and we can send out the timeline. We've got it. I don't have it off the top of my head, but we're right in the middle of that process. And again, from the agency's perspective, knowing this work was occurring, we wanted to put just a placeholder, and that's all it is. It just says, here's a placeholder for a legislative concept around the good work in House Bill 2522 and the work of the task force. So there is something there, a vehicle, we'll call it, for a way to access a legislative concept.
I appreciate that. It just seems like when you just finish a legislative session, it's a long ways to the next legislative session, but the reality is it's a pretty narrow window to convert the work that we've completed so far, the remaining work that we have done, and to fit the timeline of a potential LC is really a fairly narrow window. So it may feel like there's a big gap. There really is.
I think historically, we've had to submit what we call our agency request budget. There's kind of 3 steps. You've got an agency request budget, which is what the agency submits, and then you've got a governor's recommended budget or a governor's balanced budget, which is the conversation between the agency and the governor's office. And then you end up with something called a LAB, which is a legislatively adopted budget. And so at the end of every full session, agencies have a legislatively adopted budget, and that's kind of think of that as funds and authorities and spending for the 2-year biennial cycle. Then you have a short session in the middle of that the adjustments can be made to your legislatively adopted budget. So we're in the middle of building our agency request budget, which is the first step right now. And I think I have to look at the timeline. Historically, those have always been due August 1. I think Dr. Kendall, the submittal to the governor's office, and then the governor's office works on those through December usually.
Yeah, they have to get them back.
And then they go into the legislative process starting in January. So that's the timeline and that's a flow, and that's what we're in the middle of developing right now.
No, it's awesome. It's very exciting to have this much of the work done. Really, I think a good roadmap for what's remaining and the possibility of legislative fix for some of these issues. So appreciate that. Well, I think that's what we had for today. Does any of the committee members have any business they'd like to bring forward before we wrap up today?
I have one thing, just to go back. It was on 470-260. I can't remember if we landed the plate on this, but 260, as you know, is where we talk a lot about assistance, and it's reiterated in 280. And when we met as a subcommittee, we talked a little bit about fire chief having experience as a firefighter who was trained in fire prevention. And the first little section after that said, or otherwise. And I thought, I can't remember, Chief, if we said we were going to look into the or otherwise. Did we do that at the subcommittee?
It was decided to keep the or otherwise, just get rid of the assistance.
Okay, is that what it was?
It is recorded though, so we could go back and listen to it.
That's my recollection too.
That's what I remember.
Okay.
To allow for flexibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would offer maybe an idea for the group and interested in feedback. So we know we've got some of these sections that we need to package up and do some more work on, and I'll get right to the next Chief Cook. Or would folks feel it beneficial if, and I think it would help staff too, if we collected all of the ORSs that we think there's still questions out there, kind of what we just walked through. And we maybe retooled the survey that we've been using for this and put those all into the survey to get additional feedback and comments from the group. Because some of these we haven't touched for a couple months, and even walking through that, my mind was like, oh, what did we do with that? What did we do with that? And so wondering if we could, if folks would be amenable, if we package that all up and put it back into the survey tool just to get some comments and feedback. Would folks still find value in that? Or is that too much?
I will.
I would, and I would appreciate, I guess, I know that there's going to be work by smaller groups and more follow-up with Christy. I would say if maybe before we submit it, if there's a recommendation or if we can include recommendation from Christy in it, so we're not like starting over from ground zero. It's like, hey, this is pending, this is Christy's recommendation, or staff took a shot at this. This is what we think meets the intent. That would be sort of helpful to narrow the conversation down even further potentially.
Awesome. And so maybe the proposal for the group is we'll do that and see how far we can get. I feel like if we try to do that in April, that may be compressed. That might be, maybe we can do a piece of it in April and a piece of it in May to allow us to provide some perspectives. And then, if collectively we can't, we don't know what the answer is, or we really need people to dig into it, we could assign a subgroup to really help solve it, because then we'll have talked about it 2 or 3 times and might need a group to work on it to solve it.
Yep.
Chief Cook,
I wanted to see if you need any more committee members or any help on 115. I'd be happy to help on that. And lastly, kind of reiterate what Chief Johnson was saying. Thank you to OSFM staffs. They have done a phenomenal job putting all these packages together. Amanda, superstar. Thank you. Well done.
Amanda is a superstar.
I was gonna piggyback on, thank you for that, but piggyback on what you were saying. If it would make it easier, we could take all these group of sections that we're gonna continue to work on. I could put them all into one PowerPoint with comments that we've had from beginning to current. And then Eric and I can work together on the homework tool aspect of it, that you could have the PowerPoint to look at for all the previous comments, know what's been said, and then how to answer, the parameters that we'll put into this new homework link that we'll send out on what do you find problems with here specifically, like Christie's asked us a couple times with underlining, how would you fix it and how can we go forward making this recommendation, or what would your recommendation be? And then I think that'll really streamline the next meeting, but there are so many big sections that I think splitting committee would be
That would be, but that's a lot of work for you. Oh, well.
what I'm here for. Job security.
No, we appreciate that. That makes a lot of sense to me, and guess we'll just be mindful as we see the scope of the word, sort of the length of the meetings that we have. I mean, I can envision that these could be shorter meetings going forward if we're able to gain consensus around some of these or clarification on some of these. If we break that into 2 meetings, it could be possible that that's a couple-hour meeting. Then we may just want to consider as a group, is that a virtual meeting? To wrap up some of these or not. So I think maybe hard to tell until we actually get
At least
start
it's-
getting it put together, but I think maybe it's an option for folks. Yep.
Then we have Cassie, and Cassie is here with us, and she is ultimately our report writer. So she is the next most important person behind Amanda in this whole effort. Amanda keeps the trains running on time, and Cassie is gonna compile it all and help write the final report, which is great. And everybody knows I talk with my hands, and Cassie knows what this means. So that is.
I don't want to be doing this.
So then I think the last piece, Chief, that kind of comes to mind is we've done the dot exercise, we've worked through the statutes. There's these bigger topics that are out there when we think about, 47, we think about 50, we think about 5. I think it'll be interesting, and maybe next month or the following month, Chief Johnson and I can give a report on the outcome of the 24 legislative session that had a budget note included in it, which was the Department of Fire Marshal and the Department of Forestry create or lead a work group really around a couple key elements. One of those is funding at kind of the Department of State Fire Marshal and Department of Forestry levels. And this was all part of the conversation around 4133 in the last legislative session. So we have a budget note that directs us to report back. That effort, will involve a lot of stakeholders, including the fire service and the associations from the fire service. And so we'll have a better sense on that probably next month. And, one could envision that some of the topics we've talked about in 25, 22 are also topics in this larger budget note discussion. And so being mindful about how those connect and if they connect and when they connect. And I think maybe next session, Chief Rose Temple and myself one of us can kind of walk through what the trajectory of that budget note work group looks like. And then for this group to identify, maybe this is really something that needs to roll into that, or a conversation that's really connected to this larger funding discussion. And that budget note is fairly broad, right? It's not just, I'll call it fire funding or response funding. It includes community risk reduction, and it includes how large fires are paid for in the state. So it's a pretty holistic look at kind of the response system between the fire service and Department of Forestry in the state of Oregon. So.
Great point. Good, Roger. I'm curious what the group thinks about revisiting the dot exercise after we've conducted a comprehensive review. We've heard report outs from various groups, and Christie weighing in on things. It might help us reset our bearing going forward. And a couple of things when we first got together, we talked education and workforce. And it is a big impact to our industry, but after going through, I'm not sure where it fits at 4.7A. I'm not sure LCs are gonna fix that component. There's some ORS cleanup, cost recovery, just funding of it. It's a big one, we know that. So this, I think we would narrow it. Even districts and boundaries after going through, we submitted or saved a lot of the components that we probably put dots next to in meeting.
That's a great point, and I think that's the conversation Travis and I have had, right? There's a lot of things in the dot exercise aren't in statutes, weren't envisioned in the 60s and 70s when a lot of these are written. But the society, this is where we are. These are the challenges we're facing. A lot of it's due to the taxing system and response demands and the changing nature of the work, the all hazard work that we're doing today, and the increasing wildfire risk that all of our communities are facing. It looks a lot different than it did in the 70s, and there's no statute. So is this new language? I mean, I think that's where the dot exercise comes into play. How do we address these big issues? I think to Travis's point, there could be an opportunity through 4133 and that work going forward. I know a lot of the wildfire issues, some of the funding challenges related to resiliency and response is going to be addressed, I believe, by that work group. So certainly connectivity, right? I think that's where it's really important to align the work we're doing, the gaps we're identifying, and the challenges that we've identified with the work that's coming. So I think it's amazing time.
Just had a thing about this the other day. To your point about the 60s and 70s, you know, we haven't revisited the statute in 50 years. And we'll probably do it again in 50 or 60 years when we're all dead. Is there a way that, you know, I know there's public records laws and stuff, but the work that we do and how that gets packaged to legislative concepts and as it gets submitted into the next ORS rewrite, that some of this work can be captured under legislative intent that we can solidify for the future of why we made it. Is that, I don't know how that process works, but is there a way that we can make that request so that future stakeholders know why we did what we did?
Travis, have better feel.
I think that, you know, our vision all along, and that's part of the reason why Cassie's here, is to capture the report, right? And that report will fit. So 20 years down the road, we all have them, right? Up on the bookshelf, you can go grab something and be like, oh yeah, I remember this a decade ago. And what was the discussion? So I think as we think about the report, and Cassie's kind of got an outline for it, it's gonna kind of model what Chief Ruiz Temple was involved in through the Wildfire Commission report, and they had kind of the same concept as how do we, you know, establish this and how do we document it for the future. And so I've always kind of looked at the report as our footprint as we develop, and depending on where the legislative concept goes, there'll be legislative intent pieces that are going to be changed, and there'll be, you know, from testimony and on record around what this means, and that's the legislative intent side. But to honor the entire work and the discussions of the work, I think my vision was always towards the report to capture that. And then on the statute side, changes, they'll be legislative intent. Is that fair, gentlemen?
It is, it's very fair. Okay. I just wanted to offer to you if it would be beneficial, both in terms of securing passage of the bill or in adding flexibility to the timeline, to offer the resources of OVFA, FDDA, probably the chiefs are on the same page as signing on as requesters of the legislation. Sometimes I know you're so constricted, state agencies, with the timeline, and I don't know if it would help if, you know, we were to pick it up and run with it, or if you would just like to see us sign on as additional requesters.
Yeah, I think the thought or the vision is, you know, we want to, as an agency, just have a placeholder. I mean, a bill could always be picked up by a legislator or a committee, or through stakeholders working with a legislator, right? So it could be a committee bill, it could be legislative bill picked up by a stakeholder or the agency. And so I think all those avenues are open. I just, from the agency perspective, we wanted to make sure we
Right.
had something there. And I think let's chat and let's figure out.
Because wouldn't it be awesome if everybody at the table and Carl's group and everybody came in, yeah, we worked on this bill, we're all behind it. You know, the fire services speaking with one voice.
And I think the whole point of this group is that irregardless of what vehicle, agency, committee, or legislative bill is that this group will support that. That's why we tried to build consensus, no matter what vehicle it's in, that it's supported by all of the associations.
Thank you.
Buy into that.
All right. Any other comments or thoughts before we close today's meeting out?
When you submit the report at the end, are, like what Jen was saying, are letters of support allowed to be sent with the report? Yeah.
So we'll,
Today.
I've got a thought around how we'll do the report, but we'll figure that out.
Okay.
It might be the chair that's up there and there might be other fire service folks that are supporting that along with the agency. We've done different ways, different models, and we'll figure that out as we get closer towards the end.
All right. Any other last thoughts? Okay. Thank you, everybody. Let's close out the meeting. Good work.
Thanks, Christy.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.